Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack.
The economic foundation of the witch hunts was laid by the Little Ice Age. Historically bad weather during this period led to widespread crop failures. In pre-modern societies without financial safety nets, this resulted in famine, death, and rampant inflation.
Colonial wars placed heavy financial burdens on New England. In particular, King Philip's War, 1675 to 78, set the economy back for over a century. A decade later, King William's War created a refugee crisis and collapsed the speculative economy of frontier land investment.
Debt accumulated fighting the wars, and economic shortfalls caused by the destruction of the wars forced the Massachusetts Bay Colony to raise taxes quite steeply. However, tax revenues still could not cover all of their expenses, so in December 1690, the colony printed paper money for the first time in order to pay the debts.
This economic devastation severed the bond of trust between the people and the government. When the central government failed to provide food or security against these elements, the population became destabilized and prone to panic.
Based on Salem witch trials transcripts, the suffering of the poorest victims was extreme, characterized by a lack of social safety nets, harsh legal mechanisms like warning out, and the lifelong devastation of children left destitute.
Sarah Good represents the most prominent example of how poverty made individuals targets. Once from a respectable family, she was left destitute after her first husband ran up debts that consumed her inheritance, and her second husband, William Good, was a laborer who could not hold steady employment.
Sarah Good was going house to beg for charity. This behavior was risky. When neighbors refused her requests and subsequently suffered minor misfortunes, like a cow dying, they assuaged their guilt of not giving to her by accusing her of witchcraft. She was viewed by villagers not with empathy, but as a nuisance.
The physical toll of poverty and imprisonment was immediate. While Sarah Good was imprisoned, her infant child died.
The most harrowing account of poverty's long-term impacts concerns Dorothy Good, Sarah's 4-year-old daughter. After her mother was executed and her father, William, was unable or unwilling to care for her, she became a ward of the town.
In records, Dorothy was described as chargeable, a term meaning she was a financial expense to the town. Her father eventually surrendered her care to others because he could not afford her upkeep, and she was considered unable to govern herself due to the mental trauma of being shackled in a dungeon at age 4.
As an adult, unable to support herself, Dorothy was at one point sent to the House of Correction. This was essentially a workhouse or poorhouse attached to the jail, reserved for those considered idle or slothful, who could not contribute financially to society.
Historical records suggest Dorothy spent the rest of her life bouncing between households.
Transcripts highlight a legal mechanism called warning out, used by towns to evade the cost of supporting impoverished residents.
If a person was not a settled resident or was financially unstable, town selectmen would issue a warning out notice. This legally absolved the town of the obligation to provide financial support if the family became destitute.
Before the trials, Martha Carrier and her family were warned out of Andover. They were not strictly forced to leave, and they did stay. But the town wanted to ensure that if the Carriers fell into financial ruin, the town would not be liable for their support.
Dorothy Good was warned out of town after becoming pregnant out of wedlock, as the town did not want to bear the financial burden of her children.
The legal system itself acted as a poverty trap because prisoners were required to pay for their own room and board while jailed.
Prisoners had to pay for their own food, drink, bedding, straw, and even the shackles used to chain them.
Even if acquitted, a prisoner could not be released until these fees were paid. Lydia Dustin, for example, was found not guilty, but unfortunately died in jail because she could not pay her accumulated fees.
The Salem witch trials emerged from impacts of war, environmental catastrophe, economic collapse, and social instability. No one was safe. Accusations targeted both the destitute and the wealthy caught in disputes. Economic crisis weaponized witchcraft accusations across all social classes, leaving a legacy of executions, shattered families, and survivors condemned to lifelong poverty.
On tomorrow's episode, we'll dig into the issue of the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter and why that played a role in the Salem witch trials.